Well, that just crashed. So it's taken me a while to get this back up to where it needed to be. I'll have to open up my um, browser, and you know what? Actually, we won't go back to that presentation. Let me just pull up some RAID information, and that is that'll make sure we're getting the right stuff. Get some images of different RAID boxes that are here. But what I was saying is that basically on servers, you want to be able to make sure that that your server is going to continue to function. And so RAID 5 right here, this is a really, really popular RAID. So there's RAID 1 through, well, really it goes 1 through 5, and then they do 1 plus 0 and 0 plus 1. And so there's some variations. And I'm not going to get into a ton of that because that's something that I talk about in the server class, and we also deal with it in networking. So in this instance, really what we're trying to do is introduce you to the concept of smashing together a bunch of hard drives, not physically, but putting them all into one type of unit so that they function in a way that will allow a whole hard drive to fail and you'll be able to replace it. So as you look at these cylinders here, see it's listed disk 1 through 5, and it's showing you how it's spreading the data across those 5 disks. Really what that means is you have a full disk, and it's spread across everything, but you have a full disk that you could lose. And so you could lose disk 5 and still have all the data on disks 1 through 4. Or you could lose disk 2 and still have all the data on disks 1, 3, 4, and 5. So RAID 5 is very popular. It also gives you some other advantages. So again, the traditional original reason to have it was data protection, because a spinning disk constantly eventually is going to go bad. That's the initial reason. After that, you do get a performance boost because you're bringing in all this data across the network or even on your own PC, and you're piping it down onto the hard drive. And when that happens, the hard disk has to, again, use cache to kind of mitigate the problem of losing data because it's getting too much at once. And where does it put it all, right? So it's putting it in cache and rotating it out of cache onto the hard disk because the hard disks are slower, right? So in RAID 5, you got 5 of those hard disks. And so usually one of them is available to write to, right? And it can just pattern that out. So you're also decreasing the load, right? Just imagine if it's the same amount of data coming in here, but it's only coming to one physical drive, that will be slower than taking that same amount of data and putting it across 5 drives, because this gives you 5 different places to put it at any one time, right? So RAID 5 is really, really out there. RAID 0 really is nothing other than combining disks together, and that's very common to do. Like if you got a NAS, network attached storage, for your house, you know, network attached storage is expensive. I mean, it costs thousands and thousands of dollars. And so lots of them for the home, you know, I want a network attached storage. That one's only a couple $100. I'll get that. And then they don't realize that it really only comes with 2 different types of RAID. One is 0, meaning that all it's really doing is providing you a better throughput for writing, right? Because you have 2 drives to write to. That's what RAID 0 does. But it also just combines it all in one. So if this drive 1 is a terabyte and this drive 2 is a terabyte, you have a 2 terabyte storage space, basically. Now, you can use RAID 0 across as many drives as you want, right? You can have 10 different drives and they're all RAID 0, and each one is a terabyte, so you have a total terabyte of space, and that it'll write them across there, but there's no data protection. If you lose one of those drives, then you've lost the data that was on those drives. For RAID 5, you could run that across 10 disks as well. It's not, you don't have to use 5 disks. You can run it across 10 disks, and then if you lose a drive, one single drive, that's okay. You still have all the data. And I've actually done that, right? At work, Years ago, I had this RAID 5 system, and the thing had like 256 megabytes of cache, which was fantastic for the time. And so data would just flow onto that thing like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, I had 6 disks. So I had 5 disks in a RAID 5 and a 6th one that was what they call a hot swap disk. And so what I did was I took disk 4 and I just pulled it out. And immediately that RAID card said, I lost a drive. I don't know why, but I lost a drive. So I'm now going to take the data that was on that drive and I'm going to put it over here on this hot swap drive that's been plugged in. And it started copying that data across. And no one on the network knew. No one in the business knew that that's what I did. But that was my test, right? Before we got too far down the road. So RAID 5 is one that's out there, and RAID 0 and RAID 1 right here. So they have another image. Actually, maybe it'll pull up again over on the side. Yeah. See, there's RAID 1 plus 0, and then RAID 10, which is 0 plus 1, basically. So there's different ways to put it together, and you can definitely take a look at those. I love the graphics because they're really easy to understand, much better to understand. But we talk about this in networking, so this is not, you'll see that it's not really, you don't need to know all this for your tests. Right, so RAID 1 is called mirroring, and basically you just mirror the data. So if A1 is written here, it's also written here, so you can see what they're doing. So if this is a terabyte and this is a terabyte, you don't have 2 terabytes. You have 1 terabyte. And so that is an important thing to remember. All right, so anyway, what I need to point out is RAID 5 currently very popular. You have to have at least 3 disks to do it. You can have as many as you want after that. And it splits up the data. You can look at these images that are out there, just search for RAID 5, so that you could lose 1 whole hard drive and still have all the data. RAID 1 is mirroring things. So whatever it puts on one, it puts on the other. RAID 0 is just actually combining the 2 volumes and doesn't increase any fault tolerance at all, but you usually get a speed boost off of it just because you got 2 different drives that you're going to. And then there's other combinations that they have. RAID 1 is very common to see on standard computers these days that you could do it. RAID 0 is common on computers that you can do that. And some of you, if you're thinking ahead, you may be thinking, well, can't you mirror something in Windows? Couldn't you just create a volume in Windows that covered a bunch of disks? And the answer to that is yes. Yes, indeed you can. But when it's RAID, it's down lower into the system. And that means that the OS is not slowed down by where am I putting this data or how far does this volume reach across different hard disks. It's all handled with a card that you've plugged into, and that card has got firmware on it that's keeping track of all that. And that's what I would like to do, hopefully, is we'd be able to put in that little card and plug things in and create a RAID volume. It's not hard to create that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's it for this chapter on storage. Again, we'll be doing all this way, and hopefully you've taken some good notes, hopefully, and you'll get all the points possible. And remember that we are always going to be meeting for our labs, and that the only times we won't be meeting is when basically I'm just talking to you anyway, so you can go ahead and take notes off of video. If you have questions, make sure you ask them. Make sure you ask me in class, and we'll talk to you later.